pocket full of posy. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down.
The hills and hollers of Appalachia are filled with stories as old as the mountains. The chilling tale of the return is one of the most mysterious, and number 3 on my list of chilling Appalachian stories. It all started in the spring of 1933. The Miller family lived in a rundown cabin on the side of a hill. John Miller and his wife had 5 children. The youngest was Martha. Martha was 10 years old and the only child left living at home in 1933. The day started like any other. Martha helped her father care for the animals on their farm. She finished before noon and walked into the woods to spend the day as she always did. It was not unusual for Martha to be gone until almost dark, so no one was worried when she missed supper. Her mother was accustomed to Martha dragging home some injured animal that she had found or a plant that she thought would be of use. But once the sun had completely disappeared behind the mountains, her parents got worried. Not long after dark, Martha's father headed out into the woods with the family dog to search for his daughter. He searched until almost daylight and found no sign of Martha. It was then that her parents sought help from other family members and the authorities. Most thought Martha must have had an accident somewhere in the woods. The search went on for days and still nothing was found. Not one piece of clothing or any personal items were ever recovered. Days turned to weeks and weeks into months, and still not one sign was found. It was like Martha had simply vanished into thin air. By this time, the rumors were beginning to surface. Many townspeople began to think Martha's parents had done something to her. There was no evidence to believe this was true, but nevertheless, it was a rumor. Months eventually turned into years with not one lead or any sign that Martha had ever existed at all. Martha's mother had not coped well with her daughter's disappearance. With each passing year, she slipped further into what most thought was madness. She had several times told people that she had seen Martha, but each time this turned out not to be true. The sightings were only seen by her mother and no one else. She even claimed Martha had shown up in her dreams, telling her where she was. Each time this happened, Martha's family searched where the mother had said, and each time there was nothing there. As the 10-year anniversary of Martha's vanishing approached, her mother went into the woods searching for her daughter. She claimed she had heard Martha calling for her. By this time, everyone thought Martha's mother was completely mad and paid no attention to her ramblings. But this day, things were different. When Martha's mother had not returned after a few hours, her husband went looking for her. He found her standing in the ruins of an old house, deep in the woods, talking to what seemed to be herself. In the corner on the floor was an old dirty doll. Martha's father did his best to get his wife to leave, but she kept insisting the doll was Martha and she was talking to her. After a few minutes, he began to lose his patience. He grabbed his wife's arm and began to pull her out of the house. Then suddenly a piercing scream filled the air, and Martha's father heard it too. He released his wife's arm, and she ran to the corner and picked up the doll. Crying sounds were coming from the doll, sounds Martha's father could hear. Unsure of what was happening, Martha's father led his wife, who had been holding on to the doll, all the way back to their home. Within a matter of days, Martha's father came to believe the doll was possessed by a spirit that was not his daughter. Tensions ran high, and the couple began to argue. Martha's father was not able to convince his wife that the doll was not possessed by the spirit of Martha, but by something evil. On the third night, after bringing the doll home, Martha's father left his home just after dark and walked into the woods. No one ever saw him again. The doll stayed with Martha's mother until the end of her life. It was then buried with her on the side of the mountain. No one ever knew what happened to Martha or her father or what actually had possessed the doll. It all remains a mystery all these years later. The question is, what possessed the doll? Was it Martha or an evil spirit? No one knows. It was 1977. Peggy Jackson, a single mother of two, had just returned to her hometown. She had been traveling all over the United States with a group of friends. She had left her children with her mother and came home to settle down and make a life for her and the kids. Her mother had arranged a job and even rented a house for Peggy. The house was on the edge of town and had been empty for a few years. It was a sunny day when Peggy and her children moved in. The house was large, with plenty of room for her son Michael and her youngest daughter Sophia to have their own rooms. Once inside, the children and Peggy went from room to room, exploring their new home. They discovered a room in the attic. It seemed to be a good place for storage. The wallpaper was peeling and it was very dusty. Peggy was sure it hadn't been used for decades. The room had no doors or windows, only a few boxes and a chair stacked against the wall. Peggy and the children carried boxes to the room with a plan on unpacking them later. Over the next several weeks, the family settled into their new home. Peggy started a new job, and the kids seemed happy. As fall approached, the weather got rainy and cold, so the children spent time playing in the attic room. Then one stormy night, something happened that would change them all forever. Sophia and Michael were playing in the attic room, and suddenly a door appeared in the wall. A bright light could be seen around the door frame. The children were terrified and ran out of the room and down the stairs to tell their mom what happened. Peggy rushed up there with Sophia and Michael on her heels. She threw open the door and saw nothing. There was no door, no light, nothing out of the ordinary. Peggy immediately thought the kids were playing a trick on her. She became angry and sent them to bed. She stormed out of the room and down the stairs. A few hours later, Michael was awakened by the sound of footsteps. Through his open door, he could see Sophia. She was walking back and forth in the hall. He got out of bed and went to see what she was doing. Once he got close, he could tell something was very wrong. He tried to talk to her, and she seemed not to see or hear him at all. Thinking she must be sleepwalking, he grabbed her hand and began to pull her towards her room. She resisted and walked towards the attic room. Michael followed behind his sister, still talking to her, trying to get her to turn around. Sophia opened the attic room door, and as soon as they stepped inside, Michael could see the door. It had appeared again. Sophia walked up to the door and turned the handle. As the door opened, a bright light filled the room. Michael jumped in front of his sister and attempted to close the door. But before he could get it closed, his sister walked into the light. Then, just as suddenly as the door appeared, it disappeared. Michael ran out of the room and woke Peggy. He told her what happened, and Peggy thought they must be playing a trick on her again. She followed Michael to the attic room, and once inside, the door appeared again. Peggy and Michael tried to open the door, and it wouldn't open. They searched the entire house looking for Sophia. They didn't find one sign of her. Peggy called the authorities. They also searched the house. There seemed to be no sign of Sophia. The police dismissed Peggy's ramblings about the door. Over the next several weeks, Peggy and her mother called several paranormal investigators. None of them found anything that would help determine what happened to Sophia. Weeks passed to months and months to years, and still no sign of Sophia. Peggy believed that someday the door would appear again, and her daughter would walk out of it. 15 years passed by. Michael got married and moved on with his life. Peggy stayed in the house waiting. Then one dark night, the phone rang. Peggy answered it and heard what she thought was Sophia's voice. The phone call was not clear. There was a lot of static on the line. But one thing that was clear to Peggy, it was her daughter's voice. The call only lasted a few seconds before the line went dead. Each night for the next 7 nights, the phone rang, and each time Peggy was convinced it was Sophia. Then, on the 8th night, someone knocked on the door. Peggy opened it to see a young woman in her early 20s. The woman claimed to be Sophia and had no idea where she had been for the past 15 years or what had happened to her. Michael and Peggy's mom were not convinced it was Sophia. Peggy believed it was. She had no doubt. After spending a few weeks with Peggy, the woman who said she was Sophia went to the attic room. When Peggy went to find her, she vanished again. No one ever knew what really happened all those years ago, or if the woman really was Sophia. Each year in the fall, the county fair opens to crowds of people. Many look forward to it all year long, anxiously waiting to see what new rides they will have. In 1985, Joe Parker was one of those teens that was thrilled when the fair started. He and a group of friends, along with his best friend Billy, made plans to all go together. Once they arrived, the first stop was the arcade. The teens spent a few hours there before moving on to the midway to go on rides. They rode on several rides. Then Billy's sister Tina wanted to ride the carousel. Most of them did not want to go. Tina, who had the ability to get Joe to do whatever she wanted with just a smile, convinced him to go on the carousel with her. The rest of the group laughed and taunted Joe for going on a kiddie ride and doing what Tina wanted. The laughing would soon stop, and confusion and fear would settle in. The two of them got onto the carousel, and the ride began to spin. Then something strange happened. The carousel began to spin faster and faster. A crowd started to gather around the ride, watching in shock and disbelief as the carousel increased speed with each passing second. Joe, from the ride, could see that the crowd looked strange. They were blurry and seemed to fade in and out. He was aware that something was wrong, but he had no idea what was causing the strange event. Then the ride began to slow down, finally coming to a complete stop. Tina and all the others ran off the ride as fast as they could. Looking around, Billy noticed Joe was not there. He didn't get off the carousel with the others. Billy walked all around the ride and found no sign of his friend. Thinking Joe must have gotten off before everyone else, Billy and the group began to walk the fairgrounds looking for Joe. They searched for the next 2 hours and couldn't find him. The teens, desperate to find Joe, contacted the police and told them what happened. Within an hour, the authorities had searched the entire park. They found no sign of Joe. The police concluded that Joe was missing because he wanted to be, and they believed he had ran away. Joe had been hanging on to a leg of one of the horses on the carousel when it came to a stop. He stood up and looked around. He could not believe what he was seeing. The carousel that he'd been riding was almost completely destroyed, and other rides looked like they were decades old. Signs of abandonment and decay was all around. Confused by everything he was seeing, Joe walked away from the rides, looking for any sign of someone else. He noticed that everything appeared to be abandoned a very long time ago. Joe began walking towards town. He passed several houses and businesses, and all of them were completely destroyed. Nothing looked the same to him. The signs on the buildings were all different, and not one sound could be heard. He came to where his home should be, but there was nothing there. Confused and terrified, Joe walked on, hoping to find something familiar. A few blocks past his house, he came upon an old house. Walking inside and up a set of stairs, he found some old dirty papers. Looking at them, Joe saw a calendar with a date far in the future. Joe dropped the paper and left the house. He walked back towards the fairgrounds. He had no idea what was happening or how he ended up in this place. What he did know was he needed to get out of here and back to his friends. As he got closer to the destroyed fairgrounds, Joe noticed strange flashes in the sky above the carousel. He didn't know if this was the future or a different dimension, but whatever it was, Joe knew this place was not a place he wanted to be. There were no people, and something bad must have happened. That much was clear to Joe. He climbed back onto the carousel to the same spot where he had been when it stopped and waited. He had no idea if this would work, but he closed his eyes and hoped. In a matter of seconds, he felt the carousel spinning, slow at first, then faster and faster. Then suddenly the ride came to a complete stop. Joe opened his eyes and saw he was back at the fair. It was daytime, and everything looked exactly as it had the night before. Joe made his way to the arcade to try to find his friends. When he walked in, they were all there. Joe told them what happened and discovered that he had been gone for 3 days. For him, it was just a few hours. And now, all these years later, no one knows if he traveled in time or not even Joe. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to see future videos.